I want to welcome everyone to our second panel of the day, slight schedule change. Nomsa, we were hoping would be able to join us in person, but isn't. But instead, she'll be joining us through Zoom, which the wonderful thing, the only good thing about COVID is if this were 3 years ago, we would have probably had to just cancel this whole panel. But instead, she's able to Zoom in. But we still have our very own Mercy, who's going to conduct the interview and chat with Nomsa. The format for this panel is Mercy will begin with a couple of questions for Nomsa on this topic. We'll take some questions from Zoom attendees, but if there is anyone in the room, and we have, even though you on Zoom can't see the room, we have a nearly full house. So if any students or anyone in the room wants to ask a question at any point, just stand up and come to the mic so that we know, and we'll cut in and turn the mic over to you so we can just have an open discussion, which is our goal here, rather than just sort of a speech or a direct Q&A. So at any point, stand up, go to the mic, and just wait, and we'll switch over to you, and then I will jump in with any questions from our Zoom panelists. So without further ado, maybe I'll hand it over to Mercy for our introduction here. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna switch mics. Hold on, sorry. Hello, perfect. Hi, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the Women of Color in Foreign Policy discussion. My name is Mercy Ogutu, and I'm proud to serve as the class of 2023 president and also the president of the Black Student Alliance here at Trinity Washington University. As a political science international affairs student, I'm really excited and honored to welcome our panel guests, Nomsa and Ndongwe, to Trinity Washington University. Nomsa is a research associate at the James Martin Center for Nonproliferation Studies. She is also the co-founder of the Women of Color Advancing Peace, Security, Conflict, Transformation, or WCAPS for short, West Coast chapter. And in 2020 to 2021, she was an N-Square Innovators Network Fellow. She has a Master's of Arts in Nonproliferation, Terrorism Studies, and Financial Crime Management from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies. Previously, she served as a diplomat at the Zimbabwe Permanent Mission in Geneva, focusing mainly on the disarmament portfolio. She obtained her LLB single honorary degree at Brunel University and her postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the University of Law in Guildford, United Kingdom. Nomsa is fluent in English, Shona, French, Romanian, and Swahili, and she is a passionate person about preserving the planet for future generations. Her areas of research and focus are biological weapons, international treaties, law, multilateralism, diplomacy, non-aligned movement, nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation, education, non-proliferation treaty, proliferation financing, and sanctions. Please join me in welcoming Nomsa to Trinity Washington University. To get started off, I wanted to ask Nomsa, what inspired you to pursue a career in foreign policy?
Thank you for having me, Alan, Trinity, Mercy. I'm sad that I don't get to be feeding off of the energy of the crowd and seeing all of your beautiful faces in the audience. But, this is our new reality where we're able to do this virtually. So I will just take my wins where I can get them. Thank you for having me. Mercy, your first question, what influenced me to pursue a career in foreign policy? Well, I would definitely say it was less of a, I didn't plan it, it just happened. So I started off with a interest in becoming a lawyer. And when I was unable to continue pursuing the law profession in the United Kingdom due to the global financial crisis of 2007. I went back to my home country of Zimbabwe and applied for jobs everywhere. So yes, I know what that's like when you're like, oh, wow, I need to get a job. What do I do? I applied for jobs and I was fortunate enough to get a job in foreign service. So from then on, it was something that was also, not only was it a choice of practicality, but it was something that I had some experience in because I had studied, history and all that other stuff in school. And I had grown up living around the world. So I had a firsthand understanding or appreciation of foreign policy issues and seeing how they work or don't work. So I would definitely say that's what prompted my career in foreign policy. And then by the time I ended up in Geneva at the United Nations, it was now something of a passion project.
Okay, sorry about that. No, so I'm really curious to know, in your former position as a diplomat to the Zimbabwe United Nations Permanent Mission in Geneva, in what ways did your role as a Black woman change diversity inclusion in foreign policy?
Well, I'm not sure that I would necessarily frame it that way because, there are a lot of countries where people of color are the majority. So being a woman at the United Nations representing a Black country like Zimbabwe, a Black majority country like Zimbabwe, was very natural. And I guess technically speaking, it adds to the numbers of the diversity and inclusion aspect of foreign policy. But, it totally is also a matter of how much say countries have. The United Nations is supposed to be one country, one vote, but how much say, power, and influence a country can have on certain policies is going to be the thing that determines what impact a position can have.
As you mentioned earlier, what influenced you from transitioning from being a permanent United Nations representative to now working as a researcher in non-proliferation?
I was interested, so I was handed the disarmament portfolio as something that nobody else at the mission wanted to do. And as the new person, they were like, oh, hey, here's disarmament, have fun with that. So it was a very steep learning curve for me when I started. I had very little appreciation of nuclear non-proliferation issues. I had very little appreciation of even, I would say, conventional arms, conventional weapons, like small arms and light weapons. So being in charge of the disarmament portfolio for a small mission exposed me to all of those different subject matter topics. So I was involved in the Ottawa Convention, which is the anti-personnel landmine ban treaty. So it's a treaty that basically said, where countries got together and said, landmines are bad and we need to get rid of the ones that are already there and help with victim assistance and, rehabilitation of environments, et cetera. So I worked on different issues, and as much as I appreciated the small arms, light weapons, conventional side, which is probably what people would say is more relevant when you're talking about South countries, like on the African continent or in Latin America or in parts of Asia, I did also have a lot of time that I spent working in the Conference on Disarmament, which is this one multilateral body that is supposed to be working towards, the wonderful, lofty goal of nuclear disarmament and no more nuclear weapons, among other things. But that's like their main sort of job, which they have been failing to do for 3 decades at this point. So for me, I was very interested in how come somebody who would like to view themselves as relatively or reasonably intelligent, had so little appreciation of the state of the world with regard to nuclear weapons. And I think that's very timely right now. A lot of people are, sort of waking up to the fact that there's a lot of nukes around that could destroy the entire planet and our entire way of life due to the conflict that's occurring right now in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. And a lot of people, I have friends who are now asking me, who never asked me before, who are asking me like, do we need to be worried about a nuclear detonation? And it's like, yes, you should have been worried about that like last year and the year before, because the risk has been there since these weapons have existed in the last 7 decades. So I was very interested in getting a better understanding of how we got here which is not just how do we have 13,000 nuclear weapons, an estimated 13,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. And also, how did we get here to a point where only certain people seem to know about it and then the rest of the world is just like going on about their lives? So that was what influenced me to apply to the Middlebury Institute to study non-proliferation in depth and terrorism studies as well, and financial crime management, because all of those topics overlap.
As you've discussed the unique journey of your career in the foreign policy sector and non-proliferation, can you give us some examples of some unique challenges that you've seen or have occurred to you in your career?
Certainly. So I would start off by saying one of the unique challenges is that, yes, female representation in topics that are considered hard security subject matter is it's low. Okay, so I would say that intersection of gender and the field that I'm trying to, become not just a subject matter expert, but, to continue to be somebody who mentors and leads others, it is definitely one of those things where you look around and you're like, oh, there's not that many people who are not white and male. And then when you take it even further and you say Black people, it's like, oh, wow, like you're going to find them if they're representing countries that have a majority Black population, perhaps, but you're not going to find very much else, which is why even something as what might not seem as a big deal to some people, but something as important as having a Black Undersecretary of International Security and Arms Control, Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins in the United States, that's a big deal, y'all. That's like, it's a big deal, not just for the US, but it's a big deal like in the world, because like I said, there's not very many women in senior positions on the subject matter, regardless of country. So I would definitely say that has always been a challenge. I think it's obviously getting better, but we are very far away from equity when it comes to that. And I would also say, coming from a non-nuclear weapon state, when you try to have these conversations with nuclear weapon states, there is a tendency to look at what non-nuclear weapons states have to say as it's not as important. You don't know what we have to deal with because we have these weapons. And it's like, exactly, so get rid of them. So I would definitely say that that's another part of it. That's another part of the challenges that I have faced personally, where people have just been surprised that I'm actually there for substantive reasons and not to, I don't know, like take somebody's coat or pour coffee.
Thank you so much, Nomsa, for just being a voice for diversity, inclusion, and foreign policy. At this moment, I wanted to give students or staff the opportunity to ask Nomsa any questions or just have a discussion of diversity, inclusion, and foreign policy. There are 2 mics in the room. There's one mic to the left and one mic to the right. And audiences, if you're on Zoom, please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom. But please take this opportunity, like anytime during this panel, to ask questions.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentation. I'd asked this question yesterday, and I don't think I heard you touch upon it today, but as you entered into foreign policy and the like, who were your role models? And, did you have any mentors along the way?
It would have been lovely to know who I'm speaking to. If you
Sorry,
could just tell me your name.
Barbara Galladay. I'm a staff person here at Trinity.
Barbara?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your question, Barbara. It's great to be the person to break the ice and ask the question first. I guess I would probably, okay, I'm gonna need you to repeat that question for me. Sorry, my kid's coughing.
No worries. No. You mentioned about how you got into foreign policy, and I was just curious, did you have any role models or mentors along the way that kind of guided you? Along the way, who took an interest in you and said that, encouraged you, probably provided a roadmap or something of that nature.
Okay, so I think I was probably fortunate in the sense that my biological mother was a diplomat. So I had that model growing up to see her and other women like her being diplomats and, getting the job done in foreign policy. And then I would also say I was fortunate enough to sort of recognize when I had people in a leadership position that seemed to know what they were doing. And I would try and sort of, be a bit of a nuisance, to be like, oh, hey, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, can I ask you a few questions, like after like a meeting or something like that when I was in those spaces? And that would be like how I'd say it started off initially. And then people would give me advice. Like I asked somebody, I said, how does one like advance? Because if any of y'all are familiar, government structures are like done, like promotions are done, and it's not done like in the private sector where it's sort of like, oh, you did such a great job, so we're just gonna like give you a raise and give you a new position. It's like, oh yes, we have promotions every 2 years or 3 years. So my question to my mentors, and I say they're mentors because I viewed them as such, not necessarily because we had a formal conversation where it said, will you be my mentor? But I would always ask, like, what should I be doing in the meantime, right? So I've read the handbook, I've read all the things that you need to do well in the job, or what's considered doing your job well, but what about the extra stuff? And then, I had people tell me like, don't focus. One of the pieces of advice I got in foreign service was don't focus on what anybody else is doing. Focus on you, focus on your deliverables, focus on your area of expertise and get better. So every time just try to sort of like compete against yourself. And, I think that is definitely something that Beyonce does. Beyonce competes against herself. She doesn't compete with others. And to just use a more relevant example. And that's what I decided to do. And it was very helpful. And then as I moved into different spaces, so for example, at the United Nations in Geneva, the opportunity to be mentored or to be inspired by people grew even larger, because you didn't have to necessarily look at just like the people that you work with directly, but you could attend a meeting and somebody very impressive could come and speak, and then you could reach out to them and say, wow, I really love what you said. I'd love to talk to you to know a little bit more about how you became Undersecretary General of disarmament or something along those lines. And that's what I would do. So I always tried to sort of put myself out there and make sure that when I met people that I thought were inspiring, or when I heard something that I thought was inspiring, or I saw somebody whose trajectory was interesting to me, I always tried to reach out and talk to them. Even if it's just like briefly at a cocktail and you're just like, oh, wow, like really love, like, love the look, sis, you look good. Like Mercy, look at you, I'm loving this. It's very Donna Summers, love it, So quick question, like, how did you become president of this, the student body at Trinity? And you sort of, I think one of the things I would say is decoupling this idea that a mentor has to be something formal, but, like take inspiration where you can, talk to people, get them to share their tips, their blueprint, and put it together so that it makes sense for you. And then obviously, like by the time I got to Monterey, I had, incredible mentors that we had a little bit more of a formal relationship where you're like, okay, this is amazing. But every single person I've ever reached out to, I have sometimes elevated them to that status from myself, just so that I can get myself where I'm trying to be. I hope that answers your question, Barbara.
Very much so. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Anessa, and my question for you today is, what inspired you to start the West Coast chapter of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security?
FOMO, Vanessa. It was purely FOMO because the headquarters for WCAPS is in DC. And they just looked like they were having so much fun. This was obviously before the pandemic, when they were still having in-person events, and they'd be like, meet us at Georgetown, blah, 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 for a happy hour with Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins and the great, WCAPS like membership. And I was just like, wow, I'm out here in California wishing I could join. This would be a great opportunity to learn so much and meet other people in the field. Because, just a entre-nous, just between me and Trinity University, I was definitely feeling a little bit like, is this a right field for me as a Black woman? And I happened to come across Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins' call when she was heading WCAPS to say, join this organization, ETC. And it came at the right time because I was like, oh, okay, so there are more Black women and women of color in the field than the ones I've interacted with here in Geneva. And they who also not necessarily who are affiliated with the United Nations, which was inspiring to me and kind of like reinvigorated my, yes, this is the right choice. I need to go and study this subject and do better at it. And when the pandemic happened, we had actually been trying to get Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins to come to our school in Monterey, California, to host something very similar to this, like a symposium where we would have her talk and we'd have like, student moderators, etc. And me and some of my friends were like, okay, so we weren't able to bring her because of the pandemic, but what if we started a chapter, which was something that we want, my friend Jasmine and I had wanted to pitch anyway to her when she came in person. So we're like, well, what if we just pitch it anyway, and if she says no, then she says no. And let me tell you something, we like sat down, we strategized, we brainstormed, we had like, we had a pitch, like we really worked hard on it. And we reached out to her and she met with us. And we were like, ready to like convince her, like, so she was like, okay, so y'all want to start a chapter, like why? And then we gave our reasons. We're like, we love the work that you do. We feel like on the West Coast, there's an opportunity to bring people together on the West Coast as well in this field. And she was like, sounds great. And we had this whole pitch and we were like, okay. And we're like, afterwards, when we got off the call, we were like, it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. But it was a lesson that you really don't know what you can get if you ask. If you start telling yourself like, oh, no one's ever done that. No one, like, I don't know anybody else who's done something like this. Oh, this is like so intimidating. This is like a very important person. You will talk yourself out of opportunities and ability and progress. So that's another like little lesson that I would definitely share.
Hello, my name is Erin Carrier-Kretschmer, and I teach here at Trinity in political science and global affairs, and I used to work in foreign policy at the State Department. So one of the questions I have for you, because students ask me this all the time, what are the skills that really make the difference in terms of your success in foreign policy in general, and then security policy in particular? Thank you.
Wow. Okay, so tips to be successful in foreign policy or like national security or international peace and security. One, I think you have to be very, if we're talking like hard skills here, like, like I think you need to have a level of writing ability, an ability to basically distill very complex ideas into something very simple. Because if you are a junior officer in foreign policy, or any sort of like public policy, you are going to have to be the person who looks at something very complex and makes it simple for your superior officers to be able to take it, digest it, and then pass it on up the chain. So writing ability is important, and the ability to research. You need to be able to do research. You need to be able to, see the forest for all the trees, have an appreciation of the bigger picture. I think those are going to be the hard skills I would say you would need. But this is not something where it's like, oh, right. So if you can't write an essay about the beauty of sunflowers, it means you won't make it in foreign policy. No, that is not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying definitely like work hard at making sure that you are able to communicate complex ideas with brevity and also, like succinctly. So and then the other thing I would say, like soft skills wise, is if you are going into foreign service, in most places, language capability is still something that is looked upon very positively. And there are many reasons for it. One, it's, like if anyone in the room, and my understanding is a lot of people at Trinity do speak more than one language, how some things get lost in translation. So it is important to be able to speak to people on a human level, and language capability helps with that, as does just general emotional intelligence, appreciation of reading body language, being able to read people's body language, being able to see, okay, this is like not a topic that I can talk about confidently. Maybe I give somebody else the opportunity to do so, and that in a way builds a rapport and helps us progress with whatever the work is that we're doing. I would also say, like the usual work hard. But also I think for the new generation, I would definitely say, the ability to advocate for yourself is going to be important, because one thing that I was not prepared for in foreign policy was like thinking, oh yeah, I'm just like a junior officer, so whatever. And very easily you can find yourself like in a room with like, I guess like in the US it would be like the equivalent of the Secretary of State or or the vice president, and they're like, okay, like this is the only person who understands lemonade, so we need an explanation right now. And then it's like, oh wow, like wasn't prepared for that. So for me, one of the things that one of my mentors taught me, especially as a young woman, was to say, always make sure that you're dressed for any occasion. So make sure like when you go to work, you are dressed so that if you are sitting at your desk, it's fine. But if they're like, okay, you need to go and like join the president for some meeting, you're not thinking to yourself, I'm not dressed appropriately. And it also means like in terms of the people who supervise you, when they're thinking about somebody to send or somebody who they have faith in, they're going to say, okay, this person, is somebody who is consistent. So consistency in terms of also like your appearance and how you present yourself, but also like the work that you do and how you interact with the world. I would say that would be my advice.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes.
When you talk about brevity, and because my students ask me this all the time, my experience working in state was you needed to have an elevator speech ready on whatever issues for which you have been tasked, ready, which meant 3 minutes, literally, to be able to present a complex idea. And also you needed to be able to write it in 4 or 5 bullet points in a 2 to 3 sentence summary. Is that consistent with your experience?
Oh yeah. So for example, I had the opportunity to sort of work very closely with a director in our foreign service, and I would go to some of the high level meetings like with the minister, or sometimes like even higher, and none of these people read past page 2. So if you're writing a brief, and I think that's actually being generous, like 1 page is about, these are folks who are having to like get information about so many different things at all times of the day. If you're writing 2, 3, 4, 5 pages, they're not reading them. So you have to be able to say like, I'll give an example. Rihanna, Who is she? Oh, she is a pop star that has become a billionaire in all kinds of trade and businesses, including fashion. And she is very much beloved by Gen Z, right? You don't have to be like, oh, she's from Barbados. Like, that's like if they ask you follow-up questions, but you have to be able to be like, da, 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 da. And yes, I guess I'm revealing that I consider myself a Navy member. So I am a Rihanna expert. So this is a subject matter that I can speak to. But, you know, it's just an example to say, and I think in our generation, in the younger generation of like, I hate to say like TikTok generation, but like the TikTok generation, I think is getting very good, or is even better than previous generations at being able to say something in a very short period of time. So don't think that you don't know how to do it. You just have to like make it work for you in terms of what analogy you need to keep you on that point. So yes, I definitely agree. You can't freeze, you know? You just have to be like, yeah, I know this, I've learned this, this is what I work on. So yes, I can speak to this issue and be able to do it very quickly.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sankesta. And I heard you previously mention that there's not a lot of women in foreign service. And so just to touch more on the inspirational side, what for you do you believe women add, like what value do you believe women add to foreign service?
Wow, okay, so I think it's just ridiculous for us to be 50% of the world population, and then that figure is not even representative of us in any field, in most cases. So, I mean, there are fields where there are more women present, but in terms of like, when we're thinking about like, what value do we bring? The value that we bring is that we exist, and our opinions and our perspectives matter. No one needs to tell us that, we know that. So for me, I would say I've never really been the kind of person who lets other people determine my sense of worth. And I think when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to, you know, peace and security, when it comes to national security, defense, the idea that having half of the world's population and more involved in those areas that relate so much and impact so much of daily life is just is preposterous to me. So I would start there. I would say, listen, you matter. You are valuable. Your opinion is valuable. Your experiences are valuable, and how they inform how you see the world is valuable. And if we are to, you know, like no shade, look at, for example, that photo that they had of the Munich conference where it was a table of just white men, and it was like, wow, is this Munich 2022 or is this Berlin 1889? Who can tell? Who would know? So that's and I think without getting too much in the weeds or on my soapbox, we can see how decision making that is homogenous has not been great for a lot of us. And that includes even the folks that might be front of mind when people make these decisions.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Wairima Mwangi. I'm a faculty member here and a fellow Swahili speaker.
Jambo dada.
Jambo. And I wanted to, if you could speak to the demand in foreign service right now in terms of area studies, you know, and how we can guide our students. For example, is it, you know, with Latin American studies or Asian American or African studies? So what is the demand looking like in foreign service right now?
Well, I think as somebody who does not work for the State Department, I can't speak with authority on that. But what I can say is, if you keep an eye out on what's happening in the world, if your students are listening to some of the speeches that are made by people like Secretary of State Blinken, you get an idea of what the focus is. So I would definitely say there's a lot of focus on, so if there wasn't, now there's going to be a lot more focus on Europe and European, like, like peace and security. There's going to be more focus on Russia. There's going to be more focus on there's always going to be focus on anywhere where it's considered a hot spot or where American foreign policy says this area is a problem or this is something that we need to work on. And then when it comes to the bigger picture, there's obviously going to be more focus, for example, on like sanctions and compliance, because, like every time a country is heavily sanctioned, like they have done with the Russian Federation, there's going to be a need for laws to get up to speed. You're going to need expertise. You're going to need people. It's the same for issues when we're looking at Latin America, where you can sort of guess, yes, there's probably going to be more focus on folks who are familiar with the issues in Venezuela than there might be for like people who are familiar with issues in Peru. But if you go to, for example, the Bureau of Commerce, it might be different, right? So depending on where folks want to go, and I think that's another thing I should have mentioned is that, foreign service doesn't always necessarily mean just like State Department. You could be going to other branches that have like an outward facing exchange of human personnel. So for example, if you're going into like commerce or export controls, that would not necessarily be State Department, but you would be in a bureau that would have people that get sent overseas. So you would also want to consider that in terms of careers and where you want to go. I hope I answered your question, my sister.
Asante.
Thank you so much, Nomsa. And thank you to all the students and staff that got the chance to ask questions. I wanted to turn over to Dr. Petrobon, see if there's any questions from Zoom.
There are not, because we have a full house in here, so there's not all that many people watching over the Zoom. But maybe if I can ask Nomsa to speak a little bit about the CNS Young Women's in Non-Proliferation Initiative that you run.
Certainly. Just 1 second. Sorry, I had to confer with my manager. The Young Women's Initiative is really for undergraduate students, like the students at Trinity, who maybe have an interest in issues about non-proliferation, but don't know because they don't know what they don't know, and are interested in sort of finding out a little bit more about that, being paired with a mentor who can help them get a better understanding of the field and whether or not they want a career in that field. So we have our first event looking for our 2022 cohort next week on Friday. And I would really urge the students, and even the faculty that are in touch with students who might have an interest in pursuing a career in this field to attend. We have a great panel of speakers who are coming at the subject matter from different perspectives, which I think would be very helpful and illuminating so that people can sort of get an impression of the kinds of careers that you can have if you are focusing on non-proliferation issues. So yeah, come on down, the price is right.
I wanted to turn over back to Nomsa and ask you, like a lot of students like myself about to graduate are still like in their senior, junior, sophomore, even freshman year. But we talk about diversity and inclusion in the foreign policy sector. What is your advice for women that are seeking a seat at the table? Hello. I can reframe that. Should I? Oh, okay. As many students like myself are about to graduate, we still question like how we find ourselves in knowing our voice or knowing that we're well educated, but sometimes we don't know like where to start. And as you mentioned before, relating to diverse inclusion, is there many times where you're the only woman of color in the room, or sometimes you're the only woman in the room. So what is your advice for students when they do come across moments where they're the only person in the room that looks like themselves?
Well, I wish there was a magic formula where it's like, just drink this elixir and you'll be fine. Unfortunately, you know, those experiences are going to keep happening, but I'm encouraged that they're going to happen less because, you know, there you are. You were a summer undergraduate fellow at MISS. Hopefully you're looking to pursue a master's degree at MISS or somewhere else in, you know, foreign policy and non-proliferation and all that good stuff. And, you know, I think there is a tendency to want things to happen overnight, but I don't necessarily believe that that kind of change is lasting. So every time that there is a mercy, I'm celebrating, I'm cheering, because I'm like, yes, that's like one more person that is going to be in these rooms, that is going to inspire others to be in these rooms, that is going to feel like they have a voice. I personally, when I was working on disarmament issues, found myself initially being very timid and sort of being like, oh, let me like just like watch and listen and learn. And then, you know, the more I interacted with, but I found that the more I interacted with folks and the more I spoke up, then it was more interesting to me to actually be in the field and to stay in the field, and that I had something that I had to say. And I think, you know, all of us are going to have to struggle with that in some ways, to be working in environments where necessarily those tables were not built for you. And I think there's always the option of, yes, I'm fighting for my seat at the table, but also there is, in the back of your mind should be, but also we need to build like a different table. So finding that balance within yourself of like, how do you show up as yourself in your life versus necessarily like, how do you show up as your full self at work? Hopefully you can do both all the time in the same space, but sometimes you have to figure out a way to balance it out so that, you know, you can pay those bills and, you know, get the job done. But I still say you should always, you know, try and push that envelope, you know, try and push against whatever the status quo is, because, you know, the system really wasn't built for women and women of color to be at the forefront. So you're going to have to keep fighting for every like inch, every concession that we get. We're going to have to keep fighting.
Hi, my name is Sophia, and I have a question regarding proliferation and non-proliferation. So I'm taking a class with Dr. Petrobon, so I'm fortunate enough to have started learning about all these weapons and things like that. But for those of us who aren't taking a class or just literally don't even know what that word means, what are some resources or maybe some news that you recommend that we maybe start if we're interested in the topic?
Okay, so usually this would be when I drop the link in the chat, but I would recommend the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. That is a publication that is free, and they publish great work on all things to do with nuclear nonproliferation, as well as emerging technology. I would recommend Arms Control Association as well. I would recommend Arms Control Association. I would recommend, obviously, CNS, nonproliferation.org. We have lots of information and resources for folks who are trying to get to the truth. I would recommend Reaching Critical Will as well. That is a great resource, especially for if you're looking for statements that are being made by governments on any topics to do with nonproliferation, disarmament, even conventional weapons. And I would recommend as well the International Campaign for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons, ICAN.org. Like they have great resources as well. And they have great youth disarmament initiatives that you can also look into and see how you can get involved. Oh, and of course, Plowshares Foundation as well has done a lot of work in this space.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the incredible questions in the room. And another question I wanted to ask, as your research associate position, have you been able to expand diversity and inclusion at the James Martin Center or just like across the United States? And if so, can you give us some examples? I know you mentioned earlier that you're the founder of the West Coast chapter for WCAPS, but like I'm curious to know, like, what are some other ways that you've been able to really amplify your voice of diversity and inclusion?
I always answer this question with, I am diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like my mere existence, my mere existence is a plus for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So every time I get to do a talk and speak to people, and I get folks, you know, either applying for a program that we have at MISS or somewhere else, or applying for jobs, or, you know, reaching out to me because they're like, oh, I'm applying for this job and you said I could reach out. Can you please like read my CV and let me know what what you think I can do? Because I strongly believe in, you know, you've got to ask, right? So you never know. And I am definitely one of those people who welcomes people reaching out to me and asking me things. I'm more than happy to have informational interviews with people and steer them in the direction that they're trying to go, or give them pointers, or put them in touch with somebody that can help them out. That's basically how I continue to use my own small amount of power to amplify and lift as I climb.
We do have one coming in from the Zoom attendee. And I'll just pose it to you. What has been the job or the project in your field that has helped you the most in your personal life that you didn't expect it to? So translating your work into your sort of personal growth.
I would probably say the work that we did in Geneva for the open-ended working group on what became the treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons. Like that completely changed the trajectory of my life and my career and where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. Because I think before I did that work, I, was like, okay, it's a portfolio that I have and I'll work on it. And oh, wow, this is wild. Oh, this is crazy. Oh, anyway. And then doing that work and meeting people who were also committed to doing that work and sort of really starting to get an appreciation and understanding of how you get things done. I think it was very instructive for me and inspiring and motivating. And it motivates me to this day because that work was very much steeped in, like, oh, aren't y'all cute? Like, this is never going to happen. And yet here we are with a treaty that is ratified and operational. So I would say that.
We'll do one last call for the questions from the room. I want to be respectful of your time because it seems like your personal manager is also asking of some time from you there. But if there is anyone else who wants to take a moment to ask Nomsa a question. Well, then why don't we wrap things up? I don't know if Mercy, if you had a conclusion, or I'll pass it back over to you.
I first want to say thank you so much, Nomsa, for joining us here virtually at Trinity Washington University. I do want to leave off with a quote. It's this quote by Nelson Mandela, and it says, "The youth of today are leaders of tomorrow." And I hope this panel discussion really inspired everyone here in the room to continue to be passionate about your dreams and changes that you want to make in the community, in the school, or even around the world. And thank you so much, Nomsa, for your advice today, and also for taking the opportunity. I'm totally sure about your career journey and advice for fellow future leaders of our generation and your generation and more to come. Please join me in thanking Nomsa here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And, back to the mentor question to the students in the room, you have professors and teachers right there. Those are built-in mentors. So, make use of them, make use of their time, their office hours, reach out. I know we had Erin, who is a former Foreign Service officer. So, for those of y'all with aspirations to go into Foreign Service, you already have someone at Trinity that you can hit up and ask some questions and get some guidance, and maybe ask even, like, who would you recommend I speak to? My passion is to see all of y'all having seats at that foreign policy table and all the tables as well. And thank you so much for having me. Hopefully next time I'll meet y'all in person. And I hope you invite me to do this again sometime.
Thank you, Nomsa. We'll end a few minutes early here, but we do have another exciting panel of our own Trinity women who are currently working in foreign service. That will begin right around noon, and we will be serving lunch then, so don't go too far. So thank you, everyone.